Hello and welcome to another episode of All Fired Up with Brandon Ramsey. I'm recording today's episode from West Baden Springs Hotel down in French Lick, Indiana, enjoying a few days away from the office after a hectic live period weekend. These last few days, decided to take the office on the road and therefore the show on the road, but still wanted to get today's episode out for you this week because there is a lot to discuss, both just in college basketball and recruiting in general, but also obviously as it pertains specifically to the Kentucky Wildcats. So we'll be diving in to a little bit of all of that in today's episode. But first and foremost, please make sure you are subscribed to us here on the Brandon Ramsey College Basketball Show. Every Wednesday at 12:30 p.m. Eastern Time, I host these live episodes of All Fired Up. Also, you can find the Brandon Ramsey College Basketball Show on Spotify, wherever you do listen to your podcast episodes. Those are out every Monday and Friday mornings. And then also for all of my content, whether it be my written work on KentuckySportsRadio.com, part of the On3 Sports Network, this YouTube show, the podcast, all that good stuff lives on my Twitter account, which is at BRamseyKSR. So please give me a follow there as well. As always, today, as we go through the live show, please just leave a comment or question in the chat, and I will answer them or respond whenever we have time. But I think first and foremost today, we're going to start the discussion with Chaz Lanier, the North Florida transfer, and where things stand with his recruitment. Has a decision been made? Is he heading to Tennessee? Is Kentucky still in the mix? Those are the questions that Big Blue Nation is certainly asking this morning. Obviously, as always, I always say I'm not a scoop guy, so I'm not the person that's going to tell you exactly what he is or isn't doing. However, just reading the tea leaves, Jack Pilgrim has had some stuff on KS Board today. Just read an update from Joe Tipton as well and some other people that I trust. It seems like the winds have certainly shifted towards Knoxville, but I don't think that he has told anybody no, just based on, again, some of those reports from guys like Joe Tipton, Jack Pilgrim, people that are in the know, not the fake insiders on Twitter. I I believe them when they say that he hasn't told anybody no. Now, does that mean he's going to end up at Kentucky? Maybe not, or probably not. He obviously could still very well go to Tennessee, as has sort of become the consensus in over the last 24 to 48 hours. Now, to me, the main point with that, and where I think Big Blue Nation and Kentucky fans probably just need to take a deep breath. First of all, you're going to lose some recruitments. Not even at a place like Kentucky, and we are Kentucky and all that stupid stuff. Like, not everybody you want is going to come to your school. That's just the way that it works, especially now that NIL is such a big part of it. Like, some schools are just going to pay more than others or be willing to pay more than others. I don't think that even the craziest fans among Big Blue Nation necessarily want to bankrupt your NIL just to get certain players. I think there's always better ways. Now that you do have a little bit of a resource management question with roster building, like you almost have a bit of a salary cap. If you have $4 million to spend, well, spending 1.2 million on this player versus 900,000 on another player, that changes the value proposition between those guys beyond just what they bring you on the court. And I think, first of all, that's something that we all have to kind of start to reconcile with a little bit in this new era of college basketball. Also, as it pertains to Chaz Lanier, not that my take on it has to be the end all be all, but I think it was May 1st when I put something out on Twitter, again, at BRamseyKSR. And at the time, I think that Kentucky had 8 players on the roster. And I had said that there were, actually, it might have just been 7. And I said that essentially there were 3 goals for me when rounding out the roster. I said that Kentucky needed to land a point guard. I said that Kentucky needed to land a backup 4-man, preferably that could shoot. And then I said that Kentucky needed to land 2 of these 4 players, Kobe Brea, Jackson Robinson, Chaz Lanier, and Wooga Poplar from Miami. Pretty quickly after I put that tweet out again back on May 1st, I think literally like the same day, Kentucky landed Kobe Brea. So that checked one of the box, or like I guess half of one of the boxes. Then they added Kerr Kriisa. That solved the point guard situation. Then you added Ansley Olminar. That checked the backup four spot, especially with a guy that could shoot. So now, from those four goals I outlined on May 1st, here we are on May 22nd. We're down to just needing to fill that other kind of go-to scoring spot, and the options. It seems like Luka Poplar's not necessarily on the board right now, but obviously Jackson Robinson, Chaz Lanier. We only ever talked about adding one of these guys. I know some people wanted two of them, and I get that. I mean, to this day, I would love to have both of them. Why wouldn't you just go ahead and fill out the roster with those two? But to me, that was never realistic. Not necessarily from a Kentucky standpoint, but you have to remember, like, these kids are making decisions for themselves too. They're making financial decisions based on NIL, and they're making decisions for what best sets them up for their professional careers, NBA, etc. It's hard to imagine that two guys like that would necessarily want to play together and have to share the same ball. So I always assumed it was going to be an either or proposition. And from day one, I was very much fine with that. Again, back on May 1st, I was talking about essentially all of these steps. So, okay, if it's not Chaz Lanier, then you go lock up Jackson Robinson and all is well. In my opinion, and I would have said this on May 1st as well, Jackson Robinson is the one I would want the most. I think that he is probably the most dynamic offensively. I think he has the most size of the group to help it just in some other ways. And then I think that probably as important as anything, I think that a little bit of continuity with Coach Mark Pope coming from BYU would be important for a guy like Jackson Robinson. Now, if we get Chaz Lanier still, I'll be very, very excited. If we don't, but you still land Jackson Robinson, I'll be very, very excited, equally as excited. So to me, there's no need to panic. If you feel like Lanier is going to Tennessee, okay. As long as you lock up Jackson Robinson, then you're good. And yes, I think it'll be. I don't know what I don't want to really say worrisome. I don't want to say problematic, but it'll stink if you don't get either one of them. Now, can you shift your focus and go find and go expand that list? Well, you always can. Will they be as good as those options? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. We would have to see what that ends up looking like. But right now, there's no need to panic. First of all, Lanier has not made a decision. Secondly, even if he does, again, then you're all in on Robinson. If you get him, then you're right where you started with, or where you wanted to be anyway. So I see no need for panic, regardless of what the decision is. And I know people will tell me that's, blue shaded glasses, all that kind of stuff, but I truly don't think that's it, because again, on May 1st, I laid out all of this stuff on Twitter, and it's essentially played out perfectly to this point. And I'm going to trust Coach Pope and his staff to continue to make it fit perfectly as it has to this point. And then I think that with that 13th spot, then you do kind of put things on the back burner a little bit and see, does somebody come available because of a late coaching change, a la Trey Mitchell last season? Do you get maybe an international kid becomes interested or something develops there? Maybe you get a reclass option. That was obviously something that was talked about at EYBL relatively extensively this week, some of the potential reclass options. Will Riley being among the most notable, and we'll talk a little bit more about him in a bit when we dive into some of the takeaways from EYBL. But there'll be options out there for that 13th spot, and then also, I mean, we just had the kid from the decommit from Vanderbilt on campus, guys like that. Like to me, what you end up doing with the 13th spot, like that's a spot that, like, you can really only win there. Like, if the kid ends up transferring out, or he never plays for you, or if it's a glorified walk on, that's fine. But if it's a high upside kid that maybe is a sophomore, junior, senior, could help you, or even a guy like Will Riley who probably could come in and help you right away, well, that's great too. And I think you figure out the roster construction from there if you land the pieces like that. But to me, that's where I look at sort of the Chaz Lanier saga right now. I'm not all that worried in terms of which way the win finally closes, because I think that I'm still confident you're going to end up with either Lanier or Robinson. And if that's the case, then we're right where we wanted to be all along. And then we'll have a different discussion in a couple Wednesdays from now if that ends up not being the case. But right now, there's no reason to think that that isn't still the case. It gets me to my next point. What do we think of the current makeup of Kentucky's roster? Let's look at it twofold, because I talked about this on Twitter, I think just yesterday, and it upset some Tennessee fans, which takes very little effort, and some other just trolls online, which also takes no effort. But I do think it's an interesting discussion just to kind of take the 30,000-foot view of where we are today. I think that with the current 11-man roster, you are somewhere in the realm of the top 25, like probably 20 to 30 range is where I would put just the current 11-man roster as constructed. I think that you have a chance to compete in the top 4 to 5 of the SEC. I think you're competing for a double bye in the SEC tournament. I think you're competing to get to the second weekend of the NCAA tournament with the way the pieces are currently constructed. Again, I have such a high level of belief and trust in the system to allow each of these individual players, as we've seen even with BYU last season, to outperform necessarily what we think of them individually. I think that the sum of the parts is going to be the whole is going to be greater than the sum of the parts. That we're going to see guys just playing so much space offensively. The scheme's going to be so good to get them open, get them in positions where they are highly efficient. And then I think there's some of the defensive pieces there to be a much better defensive team, certainly than we saw last season, be more balanced on each side of the floor. So yes, I think you're looking at a top 25 roster as we sit here today. And then, as I said again, at B Ramsey KSR on Twitter yesterday, I think if you add either Lanier or Robinson, I think that then you're talking about pushing towards the top 15 in the country. I think you're pushing towards competing at the very top of the SEC. I think now you're talking about competing to make a run and go to a Final Four, and all of those things are on the table. Now, I'm not one that's ever going to necessarily project Final Fours and project SEC championships. I think that those things are just too hard to come by in this age of college basketball. I'm never going to be one to say a team should win the league or should go to the Final Four. There's too much parity, too much can change over the course of a year. But I think that if you land one of these two guys left, you're at least in those conversations to realistically have those like on your goal sheet at home of what Kentucky could accomplish. But even as we sit here today, and the way things look right now are not how they're going to, like, we're going to fill these final two spots with somebody, whether they move the needle a whole lot or not, obviously remains to be seen. But if we had to go play a game tomorrow, I'm excited and I'm confident with the way things are constructed. Now, I can understand, like, there's obviously going to be a lot of question marks because we're not going to have a single player that's ever played in a Kentucky uniform. We're not going to have very many people, if any, that have ever played for Mark Pope before, even. So there's there's a lot of changeover in college basketball these days, and even at Kentucky, we've been accustomed to it well before the rest of college basketball because of one and done under Coach Calipari. We're used to a kind of a revolving door and having to build things year to year, but this is obviously at a whole different level where truly it's a whole new staff and it's a whole new roster. So I think there will be maybe a growing pain or two, or there could be some struggles to come with that. But I'm excited about the pieces. I'm excited about the way they fit together, and I'm excited about the trajectory of the program. And I think it'd be hard for people to rationally argue against that. I think that Kentucky fans need to understand that there's more than one way to skin the cat. And honestly, the reason we all, or maybe not we all, but the reason that those who wanted change from Coach Cal after this past season, the reason we wanted a change was for change. We didn't we knew that being so young was no longer the recipe to winning at the highest levels of college basketball. So why would you be so discouraged by doing it this different way where you're landing, quality transfer pieces? They're, juniors, seniors, graduate transfers. Isn't that what we all wanted? And then like now you're worried about talent. I to me, there's a disconnect there where you can't really have it both ways. But I know that's part of fandom, especially in Big Blue Nation. Thanks, Paul. Happy to have you here. Thanks for listening. All right, next order of business. I think that we can dive into some of the takeaways from this past weekend in Indianapolis. Now, I already touched on some of these on Monday's Brandon Ramsey College Basketball Show, so make sure you go listen to that as well. But just want to quickly, in a live format here, give some more thoughts on some guys who Kentucky was clearly prioritizing, etc. Now, I found it interesting. Again, there were multiple events across the country, and I know that I believe Coach Feger spent some time out in Wichita, Kansas, at the Puma event. I believe Coach Alvin Brooks was down in Texas for a while at Adidas. Coach Pope and Coach Jason Hart started their weekend in Indianapolis and moved around from there. And then there was kind of some, crossing in the air a little bit. But there were several different events across the country. I was only at Nike EYBL Session 3 in, it says Indianapolis, but as a Hoosier native, I would say it was in Westfield. But I found it interesting and probably encouraging, at least for what a lot of I feel like Kentucky fans want, and that was that there's no shortage still of swinging for the fences when it comes to recruiting. The Kentucky staff was clearly prioritizing AJ Dibansa for the Oakland Soldiers. They were front and center, I believe, for every single one of his games. At least the couple that I watched, they were there watching him and supporting. And watching Dibansa play, like, I said it to several people throughout the weekend, and I wrote about this even too, that there's several overused terms in scouting and evaluating. Like every white guy is sneaky athletic. Everybody is long. People talk about people being 3-level scorers when there's only like 10 in the country, but everybody's a 3-level scorer, et cetera, et cetera. Well, I think another common year to year kind of hyperbolistic notion of scouting is that, well, this is the best prospect since 2009. This is the best prospect since Zion. This is the best prospect since LeBron. And it ends up in this situation where, like, every year's top prospect ends up being the best guy since fill in the blank. Well, we're going to play that game this year because that's how special I do think AJ Dibansa is. And Travis is right. I do not like Zion. Never been a fan of his, but that's different topic for different day. But AJ Dibansa is a pro now. Like, I don't know if I'd want to throw him in the Eastern or Western Conference Finals and give him 20 minutes a game, but if I was just playing the Utah Jazz tomorrow night, like, AJ Dibansa would probably be starting for me, and he'd be giving you 20. Like, he's that special athletically, physically. This guy's the total package. Skill wise, he can do everything on the floor, and I think that in the bigger picture of the 2025 class, first of all, it's just head and shoulders better than 2024 at every single level. Depth, breadth, top end talent, all the way down to here in Indiana. Like, the Division III players are going to be better in 2025. But AJ Dibansa and a lot of these other top prospects, like, there is a boon right now of like 6'6" to 6'9" wings that are physical and really skilled. Like, there's kind of an archetype of prospect right now that are all of the best players in the country. You have AJ Dibansa, who's like 6'8", 6'9", 220 pounds or whatever he is. Cameron Boozer, similar build. And another super physical, big, but still skilled player. Caleb Wilson, same build. Will Riley, same build. Then even going down a few spots, like some of the guys that Kentucky was watching, I talked about it on Twitter, about how Coach Mark Pope and the staff kind of have a type, it seems like, in terms of those bigger physical wings. Tonde Yasufu, the Shelton Henderson kid. I believe they watched Jalen Harrelson, though he hasn't shown up on any lists of interest yet. But all these guys are 6'5", 6'6", 6'7", 200+ pound wings with some real physicality to their game. So and Coach Pope was watching a lot of these guys like Will Riley, clearly a priority. Caleb Wilson, clearly a priority. They were at the Boozer games. They got, like I said, they followed AJ Didabansa closely, and we're talking about top 5, top 10 players in the country. To me, I think that the way that at least the On Three industry rankings has them right now is correct. Dibansa, Cameron Boozer, Caleb Wilson, those are your top 3 players in the country. Now, obviously, I wasn't at 3SSB or Puma or Under Armour and these other top circuits to see some of the other top names, but just in Indianapolis, of the prospects there, to me, Will Riley was the 4th best player in the gym, especially in terms of a prospect. But like, he is so fluid at 6'9". He's agile with the ball in his hands. He moves around like a guard, but he's really long. He can shoot it. He was making plays off of the bounce. Travis asks, did they offer AJ yet? Certainly the old staff did. To be completely honest, I don't know for sure if they've gone through the formality of re-offering him, but I can't imagine that there isn't a mutual understanding there that they want each other. But yeah, admittedly, I haven't like seen the Joe Tipton tweet yet of yes, Kentucky has re-offered AJ Dibansa. Maybe they did and I just missed it or can't remember it. But yeah, I can't imagine that understanding isn't there at least. But Will Riley was, to me, one of the more impressive prospects from the weekend, and he's also one, as I mentioned earlier, is at least rumored to be a potential reclass candidate. I think that physically, he could probably use the extra year of high school basketball, but skill wise, man, like he's going to get buckets right away, and he's going to be able to operate as a face up 4, could slide down and play the 3, some for you. Skill wise, he would have no issue at in the SEC or whatever high major conference next season for whoever he were to play with. I think that otherwise, just in terms of like what reality was compared to expectations, the Tonde Yusufu kid was probably the next most impressive. I mean, physically, like you can't exaggerate how impressive he is physically. Like he's a mix between like a pro defensive end and a pro bodybuilder. Like this guy is chiseled from stone, but he's freakishly athletic. Still, like he has that explosiveness and bounce that don't always come with like 225-pound wings. And then he's also skilled. He's shooting a good percentage from 3. And that was one of the impressive things with Shelton Henderson too. Like these guys aren't necessarily just bully your way to the basket. Guys, I think Yusufu seems to shoot a little bit better than Henderson does, but both of these guys, yes, they can bully their way to the basket off the dribble. They can, turn it into a little bit of a post move and put the booty on you and score it around the basket, or they're excellent in transition, but they can shoot it a little bit. They can create their own shot. They can create for others. These are guys that can play the guard spot that are really, really big. So was impressed with them over the weekend. And then I really liked how the coaching staff then still too, along with recruiting the clear top 5, top 10 players in the country, the 5-star guys, prioritizing all of them, including, and we have to mention Jasper Johnson certainly as well. I believe they watched every second of every Team Thad game. They're watching the Kentucky native Jasper Johnson, another 5-star, a couple other 5-stars from this weekend. Braden Burries, who scored 40 points in front of LeBron and Carmelo on Sunday morning for Strive for Greatness. Trey McKinney entered into the mix as well. Again, he's another kind of archetype guy of the bigger guard, the bigger wing that's 6'4", 210 pounds or whatever as a true guard. But then you also are recruiting some guys that clearly you just have a sound evaluation on, that they're not the guy that's at the top of the 5-star rankings, or they're not sitting there, number 7 in the country. Shelton Henderson, for example, we talked about, he's like more around the 50 range. Caden Lewis, a guy I really liked, pretty much on my way out of the gym. I got stopped watching the Team Durant versus the family game, which it was back and forth between Trey McKinney and a Caden Lewis. And Caden Lewis is like, just like a top 100 kid. I think he's 89th in the On3 industry ranking. So clearly they're still also trusting their evaluations and going after kids that they think are probably better than the way, the rankings people, the scouting services have them slotted. So And the other thing that was interesting, I'll touch on this and then kind of start to wrap things up. But I do appreciate because I'm a notebook guy. I'm a handheld like pen and paper notes guy when I go to these events. That's just how I operate. For my shows, no, I didn't do it today, but I'm a handwritten note guy. When I do scouting reports during the season for KSR, I take all my notes via hand. I'm drawing up plays on a piece of paper. I'm making player notes on a piece of paper. I'm not typing stuff. I don't put it in my notes app on my phone. I like writing stuff out. So I appreciated that Coach Pope all weekend. He was probably the only coach there that was carrying around like a portfolio, like a pad of paper. Was always like, had these notes out. He had all these like spreadsheets that he had printed out like that. Not that other coaches like they probably have the nerds like me back home that have all those spreadsheets and they're just texting the Tom Izzo like, all right, it's 9:30, head to court 2, or texting Dan Hurley, all right, it's time to go over to Farmers Bank Fieldhouse in Lebanon for the 11 o'clock game. You can grab lunch at Slim Chickens on your way over, whatever. But I found it interesting that like he was carrying it around himself. Like it seemed like he did the planning, and I think that's the initial impression I've gotten from him overall is that he is so hands-on as a head coach, and especially at the higher levels. I think that's something that you don't see every day. Not that it's even good or bad or better or worse. It's just interesting. I think that, again, he's walking around with these, recruiting schedules, and he has his, big board kind of with him there printed out, and he's the one kind of directing the assistants around as opposed to a lot of times it kind of being the other way around. Again, especially at Division One and the higher levels of Division One. So it was fun to watch him and the staff work. Got a chance to actually meet Cody Fieger this weekend, and he was excellent to talk to. You can't make up how excited these guys are to be coaching at Kentucky, and that's really really just fun and refreshing to see. Not that the old like not everything about the new staff has to say anything about the old staff. It's not that the old staff wasn't thrilled and proud and everything to be at Kentucky, but like these guys are head over heels about being at Kentucky, and especially a guy like Coach Figures that coming from BYU, and he was at Utah and Utah Valley and these places before. Everybody always dreams of climbing the ladder, but you know, it, it's hard to always dream of being at Kentucky. You just never know if that's going to be in the cards for you. And he said it multiple times in like a 10-minute conversation, then even circled back almost to say it again as he was walking away that like he's pumped to be here. And I think Coach Pope certainly exudes that same excitement level as well. And I think that just can't help but rub off on the kids that you're recruiting when they see how much it means to the staff to be at the school and represent the school and how excited they are to recruit you. I think that matters, and I think that that's something that this staff is going to do really really well with. But I think if there's no last second questions or comments, that is probably it for today's episode. Wanted to talk, obviously, there at the end a little bit about EYBL and my takeaways from the live period this past weekend. Um, a dead period's coming up here, so like we're not going to hear much about visits and all that kind of stuff. So teams are going to spend these next several weeks kind of wrapping up the transfer portal and all that, and then there's a couple live periods in the scholastic period of June. But we got about a month here in between evaluation periods, and that's when you're going to really see a turn of focus from transfer portal and building current college rosters to full-fledged recruiting 2025. So I think it was a good time to dive into the start of the 2025 class here on today's episode. Talk about where Kentucky's roster sits currently at 11 people, what it looks like with Chaz Lanier, Jackson Robinson, or beyond. A little bit of an update on the Lanier recruitment as well. Hopefully, I don't know if I'm going to refresh my Twitter real quick here just to see if anything crazy has happened in the last half hour as we're talking. Doesn't look like any major breaking news, at least. So there we have it for today's episode, or I guess I should say this week's episode of All Fired Up with Brandon Ramsey. Please like the video. Please leave a comment if you're watching this sometime in the future, and I'll get back with you. Please subscribe to the channel if you have not already. Also, you can find the Brandon Ramsey College Basketball Show on podcast, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcast episodes every Monday and Friday. And then also you can give me a follow on Twitter at BRamseyKSR. Travis, Paul, thank you guys for being here in the chat. Thank you everybody else who's listening live and those of you listening along in the future. Have a great rest of your week and like, comment, subscribe. Thanks.